what's going on, everybody? It's Mr. Harvey here. Let's continue our lecture with Chapter 16 and intellectual history. So we last left off, we were talking about the rise of the reading culture, modern education, and obviously a big development with modern intellectual thought, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be science. And we are going to see during this time almost like a second scientific revolution. We're going to see Einstein, Marie Curie, modern, radiation, modern physics, psychoanalysis with Freud, Darwin, and evolution. We're going to see just an explosion of new ideas concerning science. And by the 1850s, ladies and gentlemen, with education becoming more compulsory, and with education changing, and many Europeans becoming more educated and more widely read, we are going to see the majority of Europeans begin to view the world through a lens of reason, rationality, look at the world mechanically, look at the world through a lens of science as opposed to a lens of religion. People using experimentation, using observation to understand the world, to study the world. And we see the Europeans being more secular and perceiving the world more secularly. And think about that. That's been something that we've studied ever since the Renaissance. But we are now seeing the majority of Europeans really, they're still religious, but they are predominantly first perceiving the world through a lens of reason and a lens of science. Science is very, very, very much going to be a part of the educational system in Western Europe, in areas like France and Germany, and especially the UK, the Netherlands. And science was absolutely supported in professional societies, very prominent in professional societies. I think I follow on Twitter the Royal Society in the UK. And so science was very much intertwined with intellectual life. One of the interesting thinkers regarding the development of scientific thinking was Auguste Comte. And he developed this idea of positivism. This was a theory seen on the AP test recently, so let's make sure we know this. But this was a philosophy that believed that the only valid knowledge is knowledge gained through science. And he wrote that the positive philosophy and human thought in his book, The Positive Philosophy, that human thought had evolved in 3 stages. And in each of these stages, there was less religion and more science and more, reason. In the first stage of human thought, the most basic stage was the theological, and that humans, perceived the world through a lens of religion. For example, that the birds outside were created by God, and the differing characteristics of those birds were created by God. God determined those colors. The second stage is a mixture. It's kind of like deism, right? When we study the Enlightenment, it's a mixture of religion and a mixture of science, and it's the idea that it's pretty much the idea of that a rational God created the rational natural laws of the universe and created them for humans to understand. So, going back to my previous example, God created all these different variations and these different specific natural processes within birds and these natural differences within birds for humans to understand and study. The next phase is the positive, which where you have thinking that is completely void of religion, thinking that is completely scientific. And that, in my example, that would be like more evolution. For example, humans are going to look at the different characteristics of birds and realize that it's genetics, that it's evolution that creates the differences. There is no religion. There is no a God that has created these differences. Human through this the positive lens and the scientific lens, people will look at birds that in my example that I've been using previously and determine that those birds, the differences were created through natural selection and evolution. So the positive is the idea that humans look at the world solely through the lens of reason and science. Auguste Comte is also considered a modern scholar when it comes to sociology. He believed that there are similar laws of social behavior, like there are natural laws of science. And, he's really hearkening back to what we've been talking about when it comes to intellectual history. He reminds me very much of like an Enlightenment philosopher who's trying to take the idea that there are natural laws of science and apply them to, politics and economics and society, like we saw in the Enlightenment. So Gus Comte believes that there are also natural laws of social behavior in society. And he was an early sociologist. I hope you all, when you all graduate from high school, whether you go to community college or a university, take a sociology class. It's really interesting about ideas when it comes to society and studying society. They're pretty fascinating concepts. But Auguste Comte was one of the first to really look at society through a lens of reason. All right, let's talk about evolution, ladies and gentlemen. This is a huge change, and for multiple reasons. Number one, we're going to see new ideas concerning the origins of humans, Earth, but also this is going to definitely be another blow to the Catholic Church and Christianity and religion. So let's get into it. Now, one of the first thinkers to develop a theory concerning evolution was Lamarck in the 18th century, in the 1700s. And he believed that organisms had to match their environments, and that characteristics that organisms passed on certain characteristics to their offsprings, and that these characteristics were inherited, whether it was the color of flesh, for fish maybe a certain characteristic, birds a certain characteristic, but that organisms match their environments phenotypically, and those are terms that biological terms, genotypic and phenotypic, and that organisms, it was beneficial for organisms to develop characteristics to help them survive in a certain environment. And he also believed that geology changed over time, which are really important concepts. Lyell, he was very influential as well when it came to evolution. He built upon this theory of uniformitarianism, which was the idea that the same laws that govern the universe in the present have always governed the universe and are consistent across time and place. And what's important about this is that, and what's going to be really influential to Darwin and some of our early thinkers concerning evolution, is that change is gradual over time. It's not like you just see change like this. Change is something, evolution, organisms adapting to their environment is something that is very gradual and takes place over a period of time. And that's obviously important when thinking about evolution. Evolution is not something that just happens. It is something that, as we today, current humans, have looked back at the fossil record and have looked at, fossils of organisms evolving. It's something that takes place over thousands and millions of years. And that's going to be something really important and influential to Darwin and some of our evolutionary thinkers. So let's get into Charles Darwin and Mr. Alfred Wallace. In 1859, Charles Darwin is going to publish On the Origins of the Species. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is huge. You absolutely need to know this text. It is vital. It is, equal in importance to Copernicus's On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres. The Principia by Newton. This is a super important text. And you need to memorize it and know it, ladies and gentlemen, On the Origin of Species. Now, so there's some misconceptions when it comes to Mr. Charles Darwin and evolution. Number one is he did not invent the theory of evolution. That was something that was very much widely discussed before. Moreover, he was actually developing his theories concerning evolution independently of another thinker, Alfred Wallace, who I have printed his name and read right here. And they're both going to formulate at the same time, independent of one another, their theories concerning natural selection, which is how species change over time. So Darwin is not the only person who was thinking about this at the time. He did not come up with evolution, but he did at the same time as another thinker come up with a mechanism that facilitated evolution, which is natural selection. So Natural selection, ladies and gentlemen, is fascinating. I love biology and I love science. And natural selection is just something that is just an incredible theory to think about. And it's that principle of survival of the fittest. And so Darwin and Wallace, in their theories, argue that species have advantages, that some species have mutations and specific advantages that will allow them to survive in an environment and reproduce and therefore allow them to survive. And I spelled species wrong. Wow. Um, but it's the idea that species, have an advantage that allow them to survive in a specific environment and therefore reproduce and survive. So, for example, um, on a black sand beach, uh, imagine a black sand beach and imagine that there are tiny little crustacean crabs walking on that beach. Well, the crabs that have adapted through natural selection, um, the crabs that are black, for example, and can blend in are much more likely to survive because they match their environment than per se a crab that is white, because that crab that is black will blend in with the sand and more likely to not be picked off by a predator, and therefore will be likely to lay eggs and reproduce. Um, More black crabs that can survive on those black sand beaches. But vice versa, say that there was a big white sand beach, the white crabs would have an advantage over those black crabs because they would blend into the sand. So the natural selection is just the idea that that species of animals have certain advantages that allow them to thrive in certain environments and allow them to survive. And now Darwin and Wallace did not explain the origins of these variations. That is going to be genetics and Gregor Mendel, and later on you'll learn more about like chromosomes and DNA. But they came up and proposed this theory of natural selection. This theory, ladies and gentlemen, is really damaging to the church. It very much undermines the existence of God. It's going to undermine the creationism, the biblical creation of the universe, because you're going to start see people say, well, where did humans come from? How have humans adapted? And we are going to see a lot of uncertainty because now Darwin and many thinkers are putting forth these ideas that humans have gradually changed over time and evolved and weren't just, created, that we are products of evolution. And in the Descents of Man, we see that. We see the application of this principle of evolution to human beings. And what's important about this with Darwin is that you don't necessarily need the existence of God to explain his ideas, that he can explain where humans came from without God. And that's just a game changer. That is really going to bring about a lot of uncertainty with people. People are, at first, a lot of people are going to reject Darwin's ideas. But as there's more, paleontology, you're going to learn more about fossils. As geology illustrates that the Earth is much older than postulated in religious texts. Many people will start to buy in to Charles Darwin and natural selection and evolution. These ideas are still controversial today. Evolution will be accepted in the early 1900s. For the first years of Darwin and Wallace's ideas of evolution, a lot of people discounted it, but with the rise of modern genetics and studying modern genetics, DNA, chromosomes, the molecular biology, more and more people, there seems to be more and more evidence that evolution is real, and evolution is the mechanism that facilitates changes in organisms. Fascinating. Now we're gonna see Darwin and his scientific ideas be applied to other aspects of the world, and we are going to see the birth of modern racism and this idea of social Darwinism. We're going to and this is very much what we saw, in the Enlightenment. We saw science being applied to other areas the world, economics, politics, society. And so we're going to see again science be blended with social thought, ethics, and other facets of the world. Herbert Spencer, who was a British philosopher, he believed in this idea of social Darwinism. And the idea of social Darwinism is that you have natural selection within society, within races, within people, and it's this that society progresses through competition, where the strong defeats the weak, where you have strong civilizations such as Europeans defeating who they perceived as weaker African nations or indigenous nations, and stronger races. And so there's a whole bunch of implications of this train of thought. But Herbert Spencer, you know, is going to, and many social Darwinists are going to use this idea that there are stronger people and humans than others, and that this is just natural selection. This is just nature weeding out the weak and creating. This is just competition and nature, weeding out the weak. And so this is going to be used to justify, not helping the poor, because this is natural selection. The poor just haven't been able to adapt to, the current world. Not helping the working class, dominating specific peoples. We're going to see social Darwinism be applied next chapter when we talk about imperialism. That you have superior European people who are dominating inferior African societies and civilizations and peoples, and that is just natural selection. So, and a huge byproduct of this obviously is racism and bigotry. That is going to be huge. You're going to start to see this idea of superior humans over inferior humans, and so that is definitely we are going to see social Darwinism really give rise to racist and modern racism. And as we see advances in DNA, as we see advances in science, we're going to also start to see racism be very, very scientific. And that's something that we're going to discuss as we go along. But social Darwinism is a byproduct of Charles Darwin's theories. Now Huxley, Thomas Henry Huxley, he strongly supported Darwin, but he opposed Spencer, and he declared that this idea of evolution and social Darwinism was actually unethical and was at odds with human ethical development, and that it wasn't right. But we're gonna see some serious battles when it comes to, and some serious controversies when it comes to social Darwinism, the white man's burden, and this idea of superior races. And obviously that's going to really blend in later when we talk about the Nazis and the Aryan race, these supposed superior people. Very, very fascinating. And again, we're going to be talking about this, the white man's burden. We're going to see social Darwinism be used as a justification, be used as a catalyst for imperialism. We're going to see Europeans who feel that they are superior, that they are a superior people, they have a superior culture, they have superior civilization, that is their burden, that is their duty to bring, as a superior people, to bring inferior peoples of Asia or Africa proper culture, proper language, proper religion. And we will see that be called the white man's burden. So very fascinating. Okay, we're going to stop here for today, and I'm going to continue in the next lecture and talk a little bit about how Christianity and how the church is really dealing with science, how we're going to see the church dealing with education, the separation of church and state, and the modern intellectual thought. So we're going to talk about that in the next lecture.